The year was 1878. The wind coming off the Sonoran Desert had stopped being polite. It did not whisper. It scoured. Mesquite Crossing existed because the stagecoach line needed a place to swap tired horses for fresh ones, and men needed a place to lose their silver wages before they got home. It was a scar of a town, nestled between the Red Rock Canyons near Tucson and the shimmering promise of the new silver strikes. The heat was a physical weight, the dust a fine alkali powder, got into everything. It coated the tongue, settled in the lungs, and painted the world a dull, exhausted brown. And when the sun finally bled out behind the mountains, the cold came fast, a predator leaping from the shadows. Nora Avery arrived just as that cold began to bite. She was 26 years old, though the desert sun and a private grief had etched finer lines around her eyes than her years warranted. She rode a horse that was little more than a frame of bones draped in a dusty hide. The animal, like its rider, moved with a determination that had long since replaced any real strength. Behind her saddle, a small, dark wooden trunk was strapped tight. It held everything she owned. She stopped the horse in the wide, rutted track they called a main street. Her gaze settled on the only two-story building in sight, the one leaking yellow light and the tinny sound of a bad piano, Hattie Pike's saloon and boarding house. She had come to ask for work. She repeated the words in her mind, testing the shape of the lie. I am here for work. She swung her leg over, her limbs stiff. She landed light, her boots making almost no sound in the thick dust. She kept her left hand gloved, a habit born of memory. When she did pull the glove off, using her teeth to wipe the grit from her forehead, the dying light caught the scar. It was a fine, silvery line across the tender skin of her wrist, thin as a spider's silk. Her right hand, ungloved, worried a piece of linen. It was a man's handkerchief, washed so many times it was soft as milk, and in one corner, an embroidered letter, Jacob, her husband. The man the Consolidated Sonora Mining Company had sent her a polite, misspelled letter about a collapse, a tragedy, regrettable. They said, buried, lost. She led the horse to the public trough, while the animal drank loud, desperate swallows. Nora looked at the town square. It was just a wide, barren patch of earth. In the shade of the assay office, where the wall was still cool, 3 small Apache children sat. They were quiet, not like town children. They held up thin strands of leather threaded with blue and green turquoise stones. A small Apache boy, maybe 7 years old, stepped into her path. He did not beg. He just held up a small, perfectly round ring of blue turquoise. "For the lady," he whispered. His voice was soft. Nora stopped. She saw the intricate carving on the stone. Before she could answer, a man in a dusty suit grabbed her elbow. "You do not want to trade with them, ma'am," the man said, pulling her physically away. "They are thieves, all of them." The boy's face did not change. He just lowered his hand. Nora pulled her elbow free. "I did not ask your opinion," she said, her voice cold. But the man was already walking away, shaking his head. The tension in Mesquite Crossing was not like the heat. It was like the cold. It found the cracks and settled in. Nora had seen this before. The quiet war between the townsfolk and the Ende people, the tribe that followed a man named Taza. It was a war of fences, of water rights, and of averted eyes. A loud thwack of a hammer broke the quiet. A thick-chested man with a tin star pinned crooked on his vest was nailing a fresh painted sign to the wall of the land office. Sheriff Coulter. He hammered the nail head long after it was flush with the wood, as if he were angry at the sign itself. Nora drifted closer, pretending to check her saddle cinch. The paint was still wet. No Indians in town center after sundown. She read the smaller letters below. Violators will be subject to the whip. Not jail, not a fine, the whip. It was a law meant to hurt, not to govern. Sheriff Coulter saw Nora looking at it. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near her feet. It was a clear warning. He pointed a thick finger at the sign. "That means all of them," he said, loud enough for the children to hear. Sundown, or they see the lash. He did not look at Nora. He looked past her, at the shadows where the Apache children had been. They were gone. They had vanished back into the landscape, taking their blue stones with them. Nora forced herself to breathe slowly. Her eyes swept the street, a habit Jacob had called cataloging. She saw the 2 extra guards standing outside the bank, their rifles held casual, but ready. They were not locals. She saw the group of men loitering near the stagecoach depot. They were all hard cases. Gunmen who wore their pistols tied low. Men who looked like they were waiting for something to start. They were not miners. Miners looked tired. These men looked hungry. She had heard the talk on the ride in the Lucky Spaniard, the biggest silver claim in the territory. The one Jacob had worked had just changed hands. The small claims were being squeezed out, swallowed by one name, Baron Caleb Rusk, a man who had never set foot in Mesquite Crossing, but who already owned the sheriff. Nora looked from the gunman to the dry well in the center of the square, its bucket rotting on the rope. This town, she thought, was dying of thirst. But it was not just for water. It was starving for justice. She left her horse tied to the rail, promising him water she did not have. She pushed into the mercantile, the bell above the door jangling weakly. The air smelled of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and bolts of canvas. 2 old men sat by the cold stove, chewing. 2 shipments, one of them said, his voice a dry rasp. They aim to move it all before the month turns. Both wagons through Coyote Pass. The storekeep nodded, weighing out beans. Coulter was in here. Said he is expecting Taza and his bunch to hit it. Said to lock up tight. The second old man spat a brown stream into a brass cuspidor. He missed. That is bull. And you know it. Silas has not been one stick of freight touched since Rusk showed up. Not one arrow shot. Before him? Sure, the Apache were letting us know we were guests. But since Rusk, it is quiet, too quiet. Like the desert is holding its breath. Maybe Rusk scared them off, Silas offered. Rusk has not scared nobody, the old man said. He just organized things. Nora paid 2 cents for a handful of dry oats for the horse. She let the talk settle over her. She was not here for work. The lie felt thin now. She was a hunter. She was following a scent. Jacob's death. The mine collapse. It had been too fast. The letter came before she had even known he was missing. And the clothes. The company had returned his few belongings in her own wooden trunk. His boots, his spare shirt, his shaving razor, and the smell. It was not the smell of the earth, of rock dust and sweat. It was the sharp, chemical stink of tar, of creosote, a smell she had smelled once before, in a strike town up north, on the clothes of the men the company brought in to break the picket line, the men who set the fire that burned the Union Hall. Jacob was a miner. He dug rock. He did not set fires. He did not handle explosives meant for destruction. Someone had put that smell on him. Someone had put him in that collapse. And the men she saw in Mesquite Crossing, the hard cases waiting by the depot, they carried the same invisible stain. They were Rusk's men. She went back outside. The sun was gone. The cold was real. She pushed open the bat-wing doors of Hattie Pike's saloon. It was louder than she expected. The piano player was managing to hit most of the right notes, just not in the right order. The room was blue with smoke. Men stood 3 deep at the bar. A woman was behind the bar, filling a tray with glasses of whiskey. She was a mountain of a woman, built wide and solid. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her face was a map of hard decisions. Hattie Pike. Nora waited. She did not push, did not call out. She just stood by the end of the bar until Hattie finished the order and looked up. "Spit it out," Hattie said. Her voice was like 2 rocks grinding together. "I have not got all night." "I am looking for work," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "I can clean rooms. I can cook. I can pour drinks. I am strong." Hattie Pike stopped. She put both hands flat on the bar and stared at Nora. It was not a friendly look. It was an assessment, cold as a banker's eye. Hattie looked at the worn-out boots, the clean but frayed cuffs of her shirt. She looked at the lack of paint on Nora's face and the way she held her spine, straight as a rifle barrel. She saw the exhaustion, but she also saw the fire banked deep behind it. "You ever worked a saloon?" "No," Nora said, "but I learned fast, and I do not steal." "The last girl cried 3 times a night and stole molasses." Hattie grunted. "I need a night girl. The men are animals, the floors are filthy, and the beds upstairs need clean linens before dawn. You sweep, you scrub, you change the sheets, you help me mix the drinks when the rush hits, and you take over the kitchen grill when I go to bed at midnight. You start at 6 in the evening. You finish when the last drunk is gone or when the sun comes up, whichever happens first." Hattie pointed to a door behind the bar. "You get a cot in the attic room. It is small. It is hot in the day and cold at night, but it locks." She grabbed her cleaning rag. "Work steady, watch sharp, and talk little. The less you hear, the longer you last. I pay weekly, cash." "I have a horse," Nora said. "Stable out back. He eats from my hay. You pay from your wage." Hattie nodded once. "Go put your trunk upstairs. Your first shift started 10 minutes ago." The attic room was exactly as Hattie had described, small, stiflingly hot even as the night chill settled, and smelling faintly of lye soap and old dust. Nora dropped her wooden trunk by the cot. She did not unpack. She splashed cold water on her face from the pitcher, retied her apron, and went downstairs. The work was brutal. The saloon floor was a sticky mess of spilled beer, tobacco juice, and mud. She hauled buckets of hot, soapy water until her shoulders screamed. She scrubbed tables slick with grease. By 10 o'clock, the rush Hattie had mentioned became a roar. Nora was behind the bar, her hands flying, filling glasses with whiskey that Hattie poured from a large, unmarked jug. The men were loud, desperate for oblivion, and she learned to move with a blank face, ignoring the muttered comments and the hands that lingered too long when she collected empty glasses. She worked straight through until 4 in the morning. When the last drunk had been pushed out the door, Hattie tossed her a rag. "Now the rooms," she said, her voice flat with fatigue. "Linens are in the hall closet. I want them spotless." Nora climbed the stairs, her feet dragging. The boarding house rooms were just cells, barely larger than her own attic space. In the 3rd room, a man had left in a hurry. The bed was a tangle of rank blankets, and a half-empty bottle lay on its side, a dark stain spreading on the floorboards. Nora stripped the bed, her movements mechanical. She bent down to retrieve the bottle and saw something beneath the low cot. She reached under, her fingers brushing against rough canvas. She pulled it out. It was a black sack, like a small saddlebag, and it was heavy. The drawstring was loose. As she lifted it, a fine, glittering powder sifted out onto her hands. It was silver dust, not ore, but refined, fine silver, the kind that came from the final smelting. It was too much for a miner's personal stash. She heard a footstep in the hall. Hattie stood in the doorway. Her arms crossed. Her eyes went from Nora's face to the sack. "What is that?" Nora asked, her voice low. Hattie walked into the room. She took the sack from Nora's hand and tossed it back under the bed, kicking it deep into the shadows. "Belongings of a guest who left," Hattie said. Her voice clipped. "He paid extra for me to hold it. You are paid to change the sheets, not to inventory the guests." "It is silver," Nora said. "It is dust," Hattie snapped, "and you did not see it." She watched Nora for a long second, her gaze unblinking. "Finish the room. The sun will be up in an hour." Hattie turned and left, her heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. Nora finished the rooms, her mind racing. The silver dust, the quick lie, the guards on the street. It was a knot, and she was just beginning to feel the shape of it. She slept for 4 hours, a sleep so heavy it felt like a drowning, and woke to the oppressive afternoon heat. The saloon was quieter during the day. It served meals to the stagecoach passengers and the few townsfolk who did not cook at home. Nora was put to work in the kitchen, peeling potatoes and scrubbing the massive iron stove. Through the kitchen window, she could hear the drone of a preacher. She stepped out into the alley for a breath of air, wiping sweat from her forehead. In the main square, Reverend Whitlow stood on a wooden crate. He was a thin man with a reedy voice that carried on the dry air. "Order!" he cried, slicing his hand through the air. "Civilization is built on order, and order demands sacrifice. It demands we cleanse the wilderness, that we put aside the savage and embrace the light of progress. Baron Rusk, a man of God, a man of vision, is bringing that progress. He is bringing the railroad. He is bringing prosperity, and it is our Christian duty to clear the path for him." In the thin shade of the saloon's porch, a man sat at a small table, sipping a lemonade. He was dressed in a clean, Eastern suit. He wrote furiously in a small notebook, "Ellis Finch." The man Hattie had pointed out earlier, he was the correspondent for the railroad's territorial newspaper. He nodded along to the Reverend's words, his pen scratching, dutifully painting Caleb Rusk as the town's savior. As Nora watched, Sheriff Coulter approached his new sign, the one forbidding the Apache after sundown. He was not alone. With him was a man who moved with the lazy arrogance of a paid gunman. He was tall, thin as a whip, with a long, hawk-like nose and pale eyes. Hattie had called him Hawk Lyle, Coulter's new deputy and Rusk's personal shadow. An Apache boy, the same one Nora had seen the day before, darted from an alley. He was clutching a few coins. He ran toward the bakery, his eyes fixed on the bread in the window. Lyle stepped in front of him. He did not touch the boy. He just pointed a long finger at the sign. "Can you read, boy?" The boy shrank back, his eyes wide. "Sundown," Lyle said, his voice a soft, menacing drawl. He looked at the sky, which was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. "It ain't sundown, but you are pushing it. Get—" The boy looked at the bread, then at Lyle. He turned and fled. Nora's stomach clenched. She turned, walked back into the kitchen, and grabbed one of the fresh cornbread muffins from the cooling rack. She went to the back door, into the alley. The boy was huddled behind a rain barrel, trying to be invisible. Nora knelt. She held out the muffin. "Here," she whispered. The boy stared at her. His dark eyes filled with suspicion. He did not move. "It is all right," she said. "Take it." He snatched it from her hand, a movement quick as a lizard, and vanished down the alley. A boot scraped on the gravel behind her. "That was mighty charitable of you, ma'am." Nora stood up slowly and turned. Hawk Lyle was leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. His pale eyes raked over her. "He was hungry," Nora said. "He was trespassing," Lyle replied. He pushed himself off the wall and walked toward her. He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "The sign is plain, and the sheriff's word is law." "The sign says sundown. The sun is high." Lyle smiled, a thin, unpleasant expression. "You are new. You do not know how things work. That sign means what we say it means, and feeding them just encourages them." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her muscle just above the elbow. "You stay out of it. The law is the law." Nora did not flinch. She did not pull away. She just stared into his eyes. "Take your hand off me." "Or what?" he sneered. A shadow moved at the end of the alley. A man stepped out from behind the corner of the blacksmith's shop. He was tall, taller than Lyle, and moved with a silence that was startling. He was Apache. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt. His black hair was tied back with a leather cord. He was not armed, not with a rifle or a pistol, but he did not look unarmed. His face was stark, defined by strong bones and a complete, unnerving stillness. It was Taza. He did not speak. He did not move toward them. He just watched, his black eyes fixed on Lyle's hand on Nora's arm. Lyle saw him. His grip tightened for a second, a flash of anger in his pale eyes. Then, with a grunt of contempt, he released Nora, pushing her arm away. "Stray dogs," Lyle muttered, looking at Taza. "All of them." He spat the toothpick onto the ground. "Remember what I said? Girl." He turned and sauntered back toward the main street. Nora rubbed her arm. She looked at Taza. He held her gaze for a long moment. There was no gratitude in his expression, no anger. It was just a cold, clear assessment. He noted the bruise forming. He noted her standing her ground, and then, as silently as he had appeared, he stepped back into the shadows and was gone. That evening, the saloon was packed again. The tension from the street had followed the men inside. They drank harder, spoke louder. Just before 8 o'clock, the bat-wing doors swung open, and the room went quiet. A man stood in the doorway. He was not large, but he commanded the space. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his waistcoat silver brocade, a heavy gold watch chain draped across his middle. He had a clean-shaven face, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a winter sky. This was Baron Caleb Rusk. He smiled, a wide, confident smile that did not reach his eyes. "Gentlemen, the night is young, and the dust is thick. Drinks are on me." A cheer went up. Rusk moved to the bar, and Hattie herself poured him a glass of the expensive, top-shelf whiskey. Rusk raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice smooth and clear. "To progress, to the great state of Arizona, and to the taming of this hard land." He took a sip. "I am sure you have all heard the terrible news." A murmur went through the crowd. "The Apache," Rusk said, shaking his head in sorrow. "They grow bold. Last night, they burned the new supply depot over at the railhead, burned it to the ground. Tools, lumber, blasting powder, all gone." Nora, wiping glasses at the end of the bar, froze. Rusk was standing only a few feet from her. "Monsters!" a man shouted. "Coulter should ride them down." "Patience," Rusk said, holding up a hand. "Sheriff Coulter is handling it, but it proves our point. We must have order. We must have security before we can have prosperity." Nora did not listen to the rest of the speech. She was focused on the smell. It was faint, hidden beneath the scent of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. But it was there. The sharp, acrid odor of creosote, the tar smell, the same smell that had clung to Jacob's clothes. It was coming from Caleb Rusk. The room was spinning. Jacob! Rusk! The burned depot! The smell! She looked at Rusk, at his smooth face and his cold eyes. He was lying. She knew he was lying as surely as she knew her own name. No one in the saloon had seen this fire. It was just a story told by a man who smelled like tar. She worked the rest of the night in a daze, her hands moving, her mind piecing together fragments, the silver dust under the bed, the armed guards, the new law, the burned depot, Rusk. It was well after midnight. Nora was hauling a bucket of trash to the barrels in the back alley. The street was dark, the moon hidden by a high scud of clouds. She stopped. She heard the rumble of a wagon, its wheels muffled. She stepped back into the deepest shadow of the doorway, pressing herself against the rough wood. A wagon without lights moved slowly down the alley. Sheriff Coulter was holding the reins. Hawk Lyle sat beside him. They stopped at the locked door of Hattie's back storeroom, the one Hattie kept the bulk supplies in. Coulter climbed down and unlocked it. Lyle stood up in the wagon bed. He and Coulter began to move cargo into the storeroom. They were wooden crates, painted black. They were not large, but they were heavy. The men grunted with the effort. Nora could see stenciling on the side, but it was too dark to read. They moved 6, 7, 8 crates into the darkness of the storeroom. "That is the last of it," Coulter grunted, sliding the last one inside. "Rusk wants it moved before dawn." "What about her?" Lyle asked, nodding toward the saloon. The old woman. Hattie knows which side her bread is buttered on, Coulter said. He slammed the storeroom door and clicked the heavy padlock shut. And the new girl? Lyle asked. The one in the alley today. She has got sharp eyes. She is a broke widow, Coulter said with a laugh. She will do what she is told, or she will be on the next stage out. She is nobody. They climbed back onto the wagon and drove off, the wheels crunching softly in the dirt. A hand touched Nora's shoulder. She gasped, spinning around, her hand flying to the small knife she kept in her apron pocket. Hattie Pike stood there, a shawl pulled around her shoulders. She had not made a sound. Her face was impossible to read in the gloom. You are a quiet one, Hattie said. Her voice was just a rumble. That is good, but you are not blind. I did not see anything, Nora said, her voice shaking slightly. Good, Hattie said. You saw nothing? You heard nothing. You are here to scrub floors and change sheets. That is all. Hattie looked down the alley where the wagon had disappeared. There are big things moving in this town. Girl, things that can crush a person flat for just looking sideways. Hattie turned to go back inside. She paused in the doorway. You seem smart. You want to stay alive, see nothing, hear nothing. The door clicked shut, leaving Nora alone in the cold alley. The pieces were no longer just fragments. They were a picture, a collective lie. Rusk and his stories. Coulter and his laws. Lyle and his threats. The black crates in Hattie's storeroom, and the Apache. The silent, watching Apache, taking the blame for it all. They were being framed, pushed out, so that men like Rusk could steal the land, the water, and the silver. And Jacob, her Jacob, he was not just a victim of a mine collapse. He was tangled in this. The smell of tar on Rusk was the proof. Nora looked up at the sliver of stars visible between the buildings. They had called her nobody. They thought she was just a broke widow. She clenched her fists. She was not leaving. She would stay. She would scrub their floors, pour their whiskey, and she would watch. She would be the nobody who saw everything. She owed Jacob a true answer, and she would get it. That night, sleep was a luxury Nora could not afford. After Hattie had gone, Nora returned to the attic. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She slid her small wooden trunk from under the cot. The wood was smooth beneath her fingers, a familiar comfort in a world that had suddenly tilted. She lifted the lid. The scent of cedar and dried lavender rose from its depths. Her few possessions lay neatly folded: 2 spare blouses, a heavy wool skirt, her husband's shaving kit. Tucked beneath the skirt was a small tin box. She pulled it out. It held the last fragments of her old life. His wedding band, which had been too large for her, a lock of his brown hair, and the letter. It was half a page of cheap foolscap, the edges blackened and brittle from the fire. Jacob had written it the day before the collapse. A mule driver, smuggling it out of the company camp, had found her 2 weeks later, delivering it with an apology and terror in his eyes. She unfolded it with trembling hands. The heat had consumed most of it, leaving only scorched, cryptic phrases. No, you said not to worry, Nora, but this is wrong. If I do not come back, you find a man named Clanton. He is the foreman, running the blasts. They are using not just powder. It is the oil. Smells like the devil's own breath. He says Rusk wants Coyote Pass. Do not love you. She folded the paper. Clanton, oil, Coyote Pass. The words had been meaningless embers 2 days ago. Now they were afire. The oil, the smell of tar, the same sharp, chemical stink that had clung to Rusk. The same smell that clung to the clothes they had sent back in this very trunk. Jacob had been near it. He had known. And Coyote Pass, the place the old men in the mercantile had named, the place the silver shipment was going. She sat on the cot, the letter in her hand, until the gray light of dawn crept through the dirty window. She had not been grieving a tragedy. She had been grieving a murder. She worked the next day in a fog of cold rage. Hattie watched her, her eyes sharp, but said nothing. The saloon hummed with the same lazy, daytime rhythm. Ellis Finch sat on the porch, writing his column, while Reverend Whitlow praised the virtues of hard work to two miners drinking beer at 10 in the morning. In the late afternoon, Hattie sent her to the town well. "The kitchen barrel is low," she said, her voice gruff, "and scrub the front steps while you are out there." Nora carried the two heavy oaken buckets, her arms already aching. The main public well was near the stables, a wide stone circle with a trough for horses. The water was low, coated with a layer of alkali dust. As she lowered the bucket, a glint on the surface caught her eye. It was not just the dust. An iridescent, greasy film swirled on the water, shimmering rainbow colors in the weak sun. She leaned closer. She did not need to. The smell rose up to meet her, sharp and biting. Creosote, tar, the oil. She looked around frantically. It was here, at the well. Her eyes scanned the ground. A dark, sticky puddle stained the dirt near the trough. It was the path the wagon had taken last night. The wagon Coulter and Lyle had unloaded into Hattie's storeroom. The black crates had leaked. It was the proof. The smell from Jacob's letter, the smell on Rusk, and the smell from the black crates were all the same. They were all connected. "It is poison." The voice was low, and it startled her. Taza stood not 10 feet away. He was not alone. 3 other Apache men were with him, carrying bundles of dried mesquite wood. They had approached without a sound. He was looking at the oily sheen on the water. "They poison the water. They say we do it. They say we foul the springs." He looked at Nora, his black eyes holding hers. "Now they bring the poison to their own well." Before Nora could answer, heavy boots crunched on the gravel. Sheriff Coulter and Hawk Lyle rounded the corner of the blacksmith shop. They were not expecting to see Taza. They were certainly not expecting to see him talking to Nora. Coulter's face tightened. He stopped, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Well, he said, his voice overly loud. "Look what we have here, a meeting." "We are passing," Taza said. His voice was calm, respectful, but held no fear. "You are loitering," Lyle corrected. Stepping forward, he glanced at the sky. The sun was a fiery orange ball, balanced on the very edge of the western mountains. It was minutes from disappearing. "And you are cutting it close to sundown. Taza, real close." "The sun is not set," Taza said simply. "My clock says it is," Coulter snapped. "My clock says you are in violation of curfew. You and your men, you are under arrest." The 3 Apache men tensed, their hands moving slightly toward the knives at their belts. Taza made a small, sharp motion with his head. They relaxed, their faces setting into masks of indifference. Nora felt the blood rush to her head. The injustice was so raw, so blatant, it choked her. "That is not true," she said. All 4 men turned to look at her. Lyle looked amused. Coulter, furious. "Sheriff," Nora said, her voice shaking but clear, "you can see the sun. It is right there. It has not set. The sign says after dark." Coulter's face turned a dull, mottled red. "Woman, you will shut your mouth. This is town business." "You are lying," Nora said. The words were out before she could stop them. Hawk Lyle moved. He was faster than she could have believed. It was not a punch. It was a slap, open-handed, but delivered with the full force of his arm. The sound was sharp, like a plank of wood breaking. Nora's head snapped back. She stumbled, falling against the stone well, the side of her face exploding in white-hot pain. The buckets crashed to the ground. She tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood in her mouth. "I told you to stay out of it, girl," Lyle drawled, shaking his stinging fingers. "I told you the law's the law, and we are the law." Nora pushed herself up, one hand to her bleeding lip, her eyes watering from the impact. She stared at Lyle, refusing to look away. Taza had not moved. His body was completely still, but his eyes were fixed on Nora. He saw the blood. He saw her stand back up, refusing to cry out. He watched her meet Lyle's gaze with pure, unadulterated hatred. His expression did not change, but he gave a single, sharp nod. It was almost invisible. It was not thanks. It was not pity. It was a recognition, an acknowledgement of a shared enemy. He saw her. "Move!" Coulter growled, shoving Taza in the shoulder. "All of you. To the lockup. A night in the cells will teach you to respect the time of day." Taza turned, his gaze sweeping over Nora one last time. He and his men turned and walked ahead of Coulter, their backs straight, their heads high. They walked past the new sign without a glance. Nora stood there, shaking, the pain in her cheek a dull throb. She watched them go. She had spoken, and she had been struck for it. She was no longer just a watcher. She was part of the fight. She worked her shift that night in silence. Hattie saw the dark, spreading bruise on her cheek and the split in her lip. The older woman wordlessly handed her a clean rag soaked in ice water from the cellar. "Put this on it," she grunted, "or it will be purple for a week." She asked no questions. Nora served whiskey, her face a mask. The men looked at her, some with pity, some with a new, unwelcome interest. They knew Lyle's handiwork. They knew she had crossed a line. Her mind was clear. She had to know what was in those crates. The dynamite, the fuses, the silver. She had to see it for herself. After midnight, when the saloon was quiet and Hattie had gone to bed, Nora slipped out the back door. The alley was dark, the moon a pale sliver. The lock on the storeroom was thick, a heavy brass padlock, but the hinges were on the outside. The ladder for cleaning the high windows was leaning against the back fence. She dragged it over, the wood scraping softly. She did not go for the door. She went for the roof. The saloon's roof was flat, covered in tar paper. It gave her a clear view of the alley and, more importantly, a vantage point over the single, dirty skylight of the storeroom. She lay flat on her stomach, the cold of the roof seeping into her clothes, and waited. An hour passed. The cold stiffened her limbs. Then she heard it, the scrape of a key. She crawled to the edge. Coulter and Lyle were below, unlocking the storeroom. They carried a bullseye lantern. They went inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Nora scrambled, silent as a cat, over to the skylight. It was crusted with grime, but the light from within shone up. She wiped a patch clean with her sleeve. She could see them. The black crates were stacked high. Coulter had a crowbar. He pried the lid off one. "This is the one," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. Lyle reached in. He pulled out a bundle of tallow-coated sticks, dynamite. Then he pulled out long coils of gray fuse. "And the last part," Coulter said. He lifted a heavy canvas sack from the crate. He loosened the drawstring and poured a small pile of glittering powder onto the lid of the crate. It was the silver dust, the same dust from under the bed. "It is genius," Lyle said, his voice filled with admiration. "Pure genius. Rusk thinks of everything." "He does," Coulter agreed, scooping the dust back into the bag. "We plant the dynamite. We blow the wagon. We leave a few of these arrows we took from Taza's camp last week. And we scatter a trail of this dust, leading right back to their camp. By sunup, this whole town will be a lynch mob. They will be begging Rusk to bring in his security, begging him to take over. And the silver, the real silver will be long gone. Rusk's men are meeting us at the pass. This," Coulter said, patting the crate, "is just theater. They were going to blow the wagon themselves. They were going to frame Taza. They were going to start a war." Nora backed away from the skylight, her heart hammering so hard she thought they would hear it. She knew it all. A floorboard creaked behind her. Nora spun, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Hattie Pike stood there, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl. Her face was a mass of shadows, her eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. "I knew it." Hattie's voice was barely a whisper. "I knew you were not the type to just listen." "Hattie?" Nora breathed. They are going to blow the silver wagon. They are going to blame Taza." "I know what they are," Hattie said. She walked to the edge of the roof and looked down at the alley. Coulter and Lyle emerged, locking the door. I have known for weeks, since Rusk first paid Coulter to look the other way. The silver under the bed? That was from the last man who asked too many questions. He left in a hurry. The older woman turned to Nora. In the moonlight, Nora could see the deep, weary lines of fear etched around Hattie's eyes. The fight was gone. There was only a cold, brittle exhaustion. "Run, child," Hattie whispered. "You have to run. Now, tonight, take your horse and ride east. Do not stop until you hit Texas. You heard them. You know, that makes you a witness, and they do not suffer witnesses." "But they killed Jacob," Nora said, her voice thick. "He found out. That letter. He was trying to warn someone." "The dead are dead," Hattie said, grabbing Nora's arms. Her grip was like iron. "You are not. You cannot fight this. You are one woman. They are an army. They own the law. They own the church. And they own the guns. If you stay, they will put you in the ground. And Reverend Whitlow will say a nice prayer over your unmarked grave." Nora looked into Hattie's terrified eyes. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to ride away, to forget Mesquite Crossing, to forget the smell of tar and the sight of silver dust. "I cannot," Nora whispered. "If I run, I am just letting them win. I am letting them murder him all over again. I owe a dead man an answer. I owe him the truth." Hattie let her go. She looked away, up at the cold, distant stars. "God help you, then, because no one in this town will—" As they stood in the silence, a sound drifted up from the valley, a high, sharp cry. "A yo!" It echoed twice. Hattie tensed. "That is no coyote," she said. "That is a signal. From the outriders. The wagon is in the foothills. It will be at Coyote Pass by dawn." The sound sealed Nora's fate. She could not run. She would not. She went back to her room. She did not pack. She pulled out her small sewing kit. With steady, deliberate stitches, she began to sew a thin leather sheath to the inside of her left sleeve. Just above the wrist, a perfect, hidden pocket. She took the small, sharp skinning knife from Jacob's tin box. It was perfectly balanced. She slid it into the sheath. It was invisible, but it was there. She walked downstairs, through the silent kitchen, and out to the stable. Her horse, Dusty, nickered softly. She gave him the last of her oats. "We are leaving, boy," she whispered, her bruised cheek aching with every word. "We are going for a ride." She would not be a victim. She would not be a ghost. She would be a witness. She was going to Coyote Pass. It was not her first shift, but it was the first one that counted. The saloon was a different animal tonight. It was not just tired miners. It was full. Rusk's men. The hard cases from the depot had taken over the back tables. They were drinking on Rusk's credit, and their voices were loud, their laughter sharp and edged with contempt. They owned the room, and everyone knew it. Nora worked the bar, her movements quick, her face set. Hattie, seeing the crowd, worked beside her, pouring the whiskey while Nora delivered the glasses, collected the coins, and scrubbed the endless rings of moisture from the bar top, the bruise on her cheek, from Lyle's slap earlier that day, had darkened to a deep, ugly purple. The men saw it. Some looked away. Rusk's men looked at it with approval. Hawk Lyle had not been in the saloon all day. He entered now, just after 9 o'clock. He was not drunk, but he was mean. He saw Nora. He saw the bruise he had put on her face, and he smiled. He walked to the bar, shoving a miner out of his way, and stood directly in front of her. "Whiskey," he said. Nora looked at Hattie. Hattie nodded. Nora grabbed a glass and slid it in front of him. Hattie filled it. "Leave the bottle," Lyle said. "You pay by the glass," Hattie said, her voice flat. Lyle ignored her. His pale eyes were fixed on Nora. "Heard the sheriff had to lock up some of your friends today, girl." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "Heard you spoke up for them. That was foolish." "I'm working," Nora said, turning away to wipe the counter. Lyle's hand shot out. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the flesh, pulling her back. "I am speaking to you." "And I told you," Nora said, her voice low and shaking, "to take your hand off me." "You are getting brave," he sneered. His other hand snaked across the bar, fast as a rattler. Grabbing her left wrist, he yanked her hard, pulling her off balance against the oak bar. His thumb pressed down on the thin, silvery scar. "You got fight in you. I like that." He began to slide his hand up her arm, his intention clear, pulling her closer. The room had gone quiet. Nora did not scream. She did not pull back. She acted. In one fluid, practiced motion, she dropped the rag, brought her right hand up under his grip, and seized his left index finger. She planted his hand firmly on the wet bar top. Then she bent the finger backward. She bent it until it was pointing at the ceiling. There was a sound, not a loud sound, a small, wet pop, like a green stick breaking. Hawk Lyle screamed. It was not a roar. It was a high, thin, disbelieving shriek. He stumbled back, clutching his hand to his chest. His finger was pointing at a sick, impossible angle. Every man in the saloon was frozen. The piano player's hands hovered over the keys. Rusk's men were half out of their chairs, their hands on their pistols. Lyle was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes wide with shock and a sudden, murderous rage. "You broke it," he whispered. You... He fumbled for his pistol with his good hand. The bat-wing doors swung open. The saloon doors were built for noise, for drunks falling through them. They moved now with a slow, deliberate creak. Taza stood in the doorway. He had been released, or he had escaped. It did not matter. He was here. He was not in buckskins. He wore dark trousers and a clean cotton shirt, as if he were a citizen. His presence sucked the air from the room. He took in the scene Nora, breathing hard, her hands flat on the bar. Lyle, cradling his ruined finger. Rusk's men, waiting for a signal. Taza walked. He did not go toward Lyle. He did not look at the gunman. He walked directly to the bar and stopped in front of Nora. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. He saw the bruise on her cheek. He saw the defiance in her posture. He saw her trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fight. He reached into the small leather pouch at his belt. The entire room held its breath. Lyle had forgotten his pistol, his face slick with pain. Taza's hand emerged. He was not holding a weapon. He held a small, simple ring. It was a band of beaten silver, inlaid with a single, perfectly round stone of blue turquoise. He held it out to her, his large, calloused hand steady. Nora stared at the ring. "Your fingers," Taza said, his voice low and deep, so quiet it seemed to thunder in the silence. "They will be safer if they wear this." Nora looked from the ring to his face. She understood. This was not a courtship. This was not a proposal. This was a shield. This was a public declaration. In the eyes of his people, this stone meant she was protected. She was claimed. She was under the shelter of the Ende. It was a tactic, a brilliant, public maneuver that separated her from the other women in the saloon. It made her untouchable. Lyle understood it, too. His face went from rage to a pale, sick confusion. To touch her now, to harm her, was not just assaulting a saloon girl. It was a direct, personal challenge to Taza. It was an act of war, and Lyle knew. Rusk did not want that war. Not yet, not before the silver was moved. Lyle spat on the floor. "Keep your heathen trinket," he snarled. but his voice was thin. He backed away, step by step, his good hand pushing through the doors. "This is not over." His men, confused, followed him out, their bravado gone. Nora was left staring at the ring. Her heart was hammering, a wild, frantic bird in her chest. This was not a marriage. It was an alliance, sealed in public, between two people who were being squeezed by the same power. She slowly, deliberately, picked the ring from his palm. Her fingers brushed his skin. She slid it onto the third finger of her left hand. It was still warm from his body. Thump! Hattie Pike slammed her heavy hand on the bar. The sound made everyone jump. "The show is over," Hattie bellowed, her voice shaking the rafters. "Back to your drinks, and let this be the only warning. From this night forward, any man who lays a hand on my staff, I do not care who he works for, is barred for life. He will not get so much as a drop of water in this house again." She looked at Nora, and for the first time, Nora saw a flicker of something like pride in the old woman's eyes. Taza held Nora's gaze for 1 second longer. He did not smile. He just nodded, a deep, slow acknowledgement. He turned and walked out of the saloon, the doors swinging shut behind him. The noise in the saloon returned, but it was different. It was subdued. Nora was no longer just the new girl. She was something else. She was protected. She worked the rest of her shift, the heavy turquoise ring a strange weight on her hand. She felt the men's eyes on it, on her. She was safer, but she was also marked. Near dawn, when the last drunk was gone, she went to take the slop bucket to the alley. As she pushed the back door open, she saw it on the rough wood of the doorframe. A mark had been drawn in white chalk. It was small, a circle, with a single straight line drawn down from the bottom. It was a sign, a marker, leading away from the town. He was waiting for her to follow. She looked back into the dark, sleeping saloon. She took off her apron and hung it on the hook. She did not go to the stable. She did not take her horse. She was not riding to Coyote Pass. Not yet. She had to answer this summons. She slipped into the alley. The moon was low, casting long, black shadows. She followed the trail. The chalk mark was repeated at the end of the alley. She crossed the dry wash and saw another sign, a small stack of 3 stones pointing toward the foothills. She walked for nearly an hour, moving through the gray, pre-dawn light. The trail led her into a narrow arroyo, a deep cut in the earth hidden by mesquite and palo verde trees. She smelled the faint scent of wood smoke. She rounded a high bank of red rock and stopped. It was a camp, but it was not the war party of Coulter's speeches. It was a dozen small, hidden shelters. It was old women, their faces maps of deep lines, tending a low, smokeless fire. It was children, sleeping in piles of blankets, their faces thin. It was 3 old men, mending harnesses. There were no warriors. There were no rifles. This was a camp of the old, the very young, and the women. This was not a band of raiders. This was a family, starving. This is the enemy Rusk warns you about. Taza emerged from the shadows. He had been watching her approach. He moved with a grace that was jarring. He was there, and then he was not. He gestured to the small camp. "We were moved from the reservation. They said the land was bad. They moved us here. They said the water was good. Now, this water is also bad, and they say we cannot hunt." "The well," Nora whispered, her hand rising to her bruised cheek. "The oil, in the town well." "And in the spring, 2 miles up," Taza said. "They poison the water. They shoot the deer and leave them to rot. They want us gone, or dead." He stepped closer. He was tall, and he smelled of the desert, of dust and clean air. "A white hand is making the silver dirty. It is making the water dirty. We only want to live. We do not want to die." Nora looked at the sleeping children. She thought of the black crates, the dynamite, the silver dust, the plan to blame these people, these starving families, For a violent robbery. They are planning something, Nora said, her voice hard. At Coyote Pass, they have a wagon shipment of silver. They are going to blow it up and say you did it. Taza's face remained impassive, but his eyes, they burned. We know. We have watched. We know they move the black powder. We know they lie. How? Nora asked. You are not the only one who watches, Taza said. My people see the wagons, we see the guards, and we see the lies. He looked down at the ring on her hand. You spoke for my people when the sun was high. You fought the man who struck you. You wear the stone. You are an ally, whether you chose it or not. He killed my husband, Nora whispered, the words finally coming out. The man Rusk, the collapse at the mine. It was not an accident. They used that oil, that tar, my husband knew. Taza nodded slowly. The man Jacob. We know. We saw the fire at the mine, before the collapse. We saw the men who set it, the men with hawk's eyes. He meant Lyle. The alliance was sealed. It was not just about the ring. It was about the water, the silver, and the dead. They will move the wagon at dawn. Taza said, they will make their theater. We will be there, to watch. But now, you will be there too. Yes, Nora said, her hand closing over the cold turquoise. I will. The air in the arroyo was sharp with the cold of the coming dawn. The small, hidden fires of Taza's camp offered little warmth, only the smell of mesquite smoke. Nora stood before him, the weight of the turquoise ring on her finger a heavy, foreign presence. My husband, she said, her voice rough. Before the mine collapsed, he sent me a letter. She reached into the pocket of her skirt and retrieved the small tin box. Her fingers, stained with bar soap and grease, fumbled for a moment. She pulled out the brittle, blackened fragment of paper. She had read it so many times the words were burned into her own memory, but seeing them again made her hands shake. She held it out. I did not understand it, not until now. Taza took the paper. His gaze was intense. He held it to the faint light of the fire. He could not read the English script, but she saw his eyes trace the shapes of the words she had memorized. He names a man, Nora said, her voice barely a whisper. Clanton, a foreman. He said they were using an oil, a tar, and he names the place. Coyote Pass. Taza's expression did not change, but a new stillness settled over him. He folded the fragile paper carefully and handed it back to her. He, in turn, reached into the pouch at his belt. He did not pull out a ring this time. He unfolded a piece of dirty canvas, the kind used to patch wagon covers. It was stiff. It was caked with the same black, sticky tar that she had smelled at the well, the same smell that clung to Rusk and caught in the tar. Glittering like trapped stars in a black sky was a fine powder of silver. Nora gasped, reaching out to touch it. It was identical. The tar from Jacob's letter, the silver from the bag under the bed, and the poison in the well. It was all one thing. My scouts found this near the pass, Taza said. They paint the rocks with it. They leave it on the trail. They take our arrows, dip them in this tar, and leave them near the burned depot. They are making a trail of lies, leading from their crimes to our homes. The crates, Nora said, the picture completing itself in her mind, stark and terrible. The black crates in Hattie's storeroom, Coulter and Lyle. They are filled with dynamite, and that dust. They are going to blow the wagon themselves and scatter that dust to frame you. We know, Taza said simply. The coldness of his certainty chilled her more than the desert air. You knew. We watch. We listen. We know they plan a performance. We did not know why. Your husband's letter gives us the name, Clanton, and the reason, Rusk. They stood in silence, the truth a shared burden between them. They will move the wagon soon, Taza said, looking east, where the sky was turning a pale, sick gray. They will stage their play at the pass. My men will be on the cliffs. We will watch. We will not interfere. If we fight, we give them the war they want. We will only be witnesses." "I have to be there," Nora said. "I have to see it. I have to see this man, Clanton." Taza looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her small, tired frame. "You are one woman. You are not a warrior. It is not your fight." "He made it my fight when he killed Jacob," Nora retorted, her voice hard. "He made it my fight when his man struck me, and you." She looked at the ring. "You made it my fight when you put this on my hand. I will be there." Taza saw the unbending iron in her spine. He gave a slow nod. "Go back to the saloon. You are the widow who scrubs floors. You hear nothing. You see nothing. They must not know you are gone." "But how will I find you? How will you know I am there?" She looked down at her hand, the handkerchief, the one she had clutched since Jacob's death. She pulled it from her apron pocket. The embroidered J was visible in the faint light. "Jacob." "At the mouth of Coyote Pass," Nora said, her voice gaining strength. "There is an old telegraph pole. The wire is cut. It stands alone. I will ride out before them. I will tie this to the pole. When you see it, you will know I am there. I will be watching with you." "A white flag," Taza said, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching his eyes. "It is blue," Nora said, "and it is a promise." "Go," Taza said. "Go now. Move with the shadows." She slipped back into Mesquite Crossing as the town was just beginning to wake. The smell of baking bread and bad coffee filled the air. She entered the saloon kitchen through the back door. Hattie was there, sitting at the rough wooden table, a cup of black coffee in her hand. She had not slept. "You went out," Hattie stated. It was not a question. "Yes." Nora stood before her, the chill of the desert still on her clothes. "You saw him." "Yes, Hattie, it is true, all of it. They are going to blow the wagon at Coyote Pass. They have dynamite and silver dust, all to frame Taza and his people." Hattie stared into her coffee cup. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, the older woman looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. But the fear Nora had seen on the roof was gone. It had been replaced by a slow, simmering anger. "My husband, rest his soul, built this saloon with his own hands," Hattie said, her voice a low rumble. "He died trying to keep the railroad from stealing the water rights to this valley. They said his wagon overturned. An accident. He was a teamster for 20 years. He never had an accident." She stood, her movements heavy, and walked to the small, cramped office behind the bar. Nora heard the scrape of a key in a lock. Hattie returned, holding a piece of paper. It was a freight invoice. "Coulter thinks I am just a fat old woman who cannot read," Hattie said, her voice thick with contempt. "I signed for all the saloon deliveries. This came last week, with the crates you saw." She smoothed the paper on the table. Nora leaned in. It was an invoice from the Rusk Consolidated Supply Company, out of Tucson. 8 crates. Nora read aloud. "Contents marine paint and tar. Destination Mesquite Crossing Depot." "Ship paint," Hattie said, tapping the paper with a thick finger. "In the middle of the Sonoran Desert, 200 miles from the nearest ocean." That is how he did it. He legalized his explosives. He had me sign for them. "This is proof," Nora breathed. "It is a piece of paper," Hattie said, "but it is a start." She folded it and pushed it toward Nora. "You keep it. I am a target. I own property. You are nobody. You are just the help. You are invisible. Sometimes, invisible is the safest way to be." That day was a Sunday. Hattie forced Nora to attend the church service. "You look normal," Hattie commanded. "You look pious. Go scrub the church steps if you have to. But you be seen. You be normal." Nora sat in the back pew, the splintered wood hard against her back. The turquoise ring felt heavy on her hand. Reverend Whitlow was in the pulpit, his reedy voice soaring with manufactured righteousness. "The heathen," he cried, his face flushed. "They burn our supplies. They are a plague on this decent land, but the Lord provides. He has sent a righteous man to be his sword, a man to cleanse this valley, Baron Caleb Rusk." Rusk sat in the front pew, his hands folded in his lap, the picture of humility. After the service, Nora was roped into serving weak coffee and dry biscuits at the social hour. She moved through the crowd, her face blank, her eyes open. She saw Rusk standing with Whitlow and Ellis Finch, the young reporter from the railroad paper. "A generous donation, Reverend," Rusk was saying, passing a thick white envelope to the preacher. "For the new steeple fund, the Lord's work must continue." "God bless you, Baron, God bless you," Whitlow gushed, his eyes gleaming. Rusk turned to Finch, unrolling a large document on the table. "And as you will note for your article, Mr. Finch, this new water accord has been ratified by the town council." Nora leaned closer, pretending to refill the sugar bowl. Her eyes scanned the document. It was a map of the entire valley. A thick black line marked the path of the new railroad. Another line marked the river. "It grants priority, water access to the railroad," Rusk said smoothly. "To ensure the prosperity of all, progress must be served." Nora saw the small print at the bottom. A clause, dense with legal terms. "All prior ancestral or tribal water claims related to said aquifers are hereby declared null and void upon commencement of construction." They were stealing the river. The day dragged on. The town was quiet, suspended in a tense, hot bubble of anticipation. The saloon was nearly empty. Nora went to the kitchen to begin preparing the night's thin stew. She was alone. The sun was setting. The wagon would be moving soon. The back door creaked open. Nora spun around. Hawk Lyle stood there. His left hand was heavily bandaged, a crude splint making his finger rigid. His pale eyes were flat, reptilian. "Just you and me, girl," he whispered, stepping into the kitchen and letting the door swing shut. Nora's hand instinctively went to her apron. The obsidian knife was not there. It was in her sleeve, in the sheath she had sewn. "I saw that pretty ring," Lyle sneered. Walking toward her, he was enjoying her fear. "You think that Apache Buck is going to protect you? He is a dead man walking. By this time tomorrow, this whole town will be hunting his people for sport. Rusk is going to pay a bounty for every Apache scalp." He backed her against the stove. The iron was still warm. "And you," he said, reaching out with his good hand. "You are just a whore with a fancy piece of rock. I am going to take it off your finger. After I am done." "Get out," Nora said, her voice shaking. "Or what?" he laughed. "Going to break another one." He lunged, grabbing the front of her dress, yanking her toward him. A sound, a scrape of wood on wood. Lyle froze. His head turned. The wooden trap door in the corner, the one Nora used to fetch potatoes from the root cellar, lifted open. Taza rose from the darkness. He did not make a sound. He was just there, a column of shadow and muscle. Lyle's eyes went wide. He had not heard a thing. He tried to let go of Nora, to draw his pistol. He was too slow. Taza moved. He did not pull a weapon. He struck Lyle once. It was not a punch. It was a hard, precise blow with the heel of his hand to the side of Lyle's neck. There was a sickening thud. Lyle's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went limp. He collapsed in a heap on the kitchen floor, unconscious. Taza grabbed Nora's arm. His grip was like steel. "He will wake. Come." He pulled her, stumbling, toward the open trap door. He pushed her down into the darkness and followed, pulling the heavy door shut over their heads. Blackness, utter, complete blackness. It smelled of damp earth, mildew, and old apples. Nora was breathing in ragged gasps. She was pressed against him in the tiny, enclosed space. She could feel the heat of his body, the solid wall of his chest. A match scraped. The sudden flare of light blinded her. Taza lit a small, smoky oil lamp that sat on a dirt shelf. The cellar was tiny, barely 6 feet square, lined with crumbling brick. He looked at her. The golden lamplight threw strange, dancing shadows across his face. He saw her shaking. His gaze dropped to her hands, clenched so tight her knuckles were white. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He just watched her, letting her catch her breath. The silence was absolute. In this small, dark space, the noise of the saloon, the threat of the town, all of it faded. There was only the sound of their breathing. He reached past her, to a small niche in the brick. His hand returned. He was holding a knife. It was not a steel knife. The blade was black, chipped from a single piece of volcanic glass. It was obsidian, flaked to a lethally sharp edge. The hilt was wrapped tightly in deer sinew. Carved into the sinew, at the base of the blade, was a small, powerful figure, a bird with its wings spread wide, lightning bolts shooting from its eyes. The Thunderbird. He held it out to her, hilt first. He placed it in her right hand, the hand that was not wearing his ring. "This was my grandfather's blade," Taza said. His voice was a low vibration in the small cellar. "It is good glass. It holds its edge." He looked at her, his eyes holding hers. "When you are afraid," he said, "you hold the stone. The stone gives you shelter. This," he nodded at the black blade in her hand, "this gives you a voice." It was a promise. It was an arming. It was the deepest trust he could offer. Nora closed her hand around the hilt. The glass was cool and solid. Her shaking stopped. "He will wake up," she whispered. "I will be gone," Taza said. "He will not know. He will think he fell. Go to the pass. As we planned. We will be waiting." He reached out and, with a puff of air, extinguished the lamp, plunging them back into darkness. She heard a faint scrape, the sound of him moving. The door opened and closed. He was gone. She waited in the dark, the obsidian knife in one hand, the turquoise ring on the other. An hour later, she saddled Dusty. The horse was restless. Sensing her tension, she rode out of town, heading west, just a woman on a horse, melting into the pre-dawn shadows. The sun was just breaking, painting the clouds a violent orange. When she reached the mouth of Coyote Pass, the canyon was a deep, red wound in the earth. She saw the pole, stark against the sky. She dismounted. She took the linen handkerchief, Jacob's handkerchief, from her pocket. With cold, steady fingers, she tied it to the splintered wood. It fluttered in the rising breeze. A small white flag, a blue initial. She led Dusty off the trail, hiding him in a thicket of boulders and mesquite. Then she began to climb. She found a high ledge, a narrow shelf of rock that gave her a clear view of the canyon floor below. She waited. The sun climbed, heating the rock. She saw them, across the canyon, on the opposite rim, so still they were almost invisible. Taza and 3 other men, they were shadows, watching. A rumble, dust, the creak of wheels. They were coming. She looked down. The wagon train appeared, a heavy Wells Fargo strongbox, its iron sides gleaming. A second, simpler freight wagon followed. Sheriff Coulter rode in front, with 3 guards. They stopped, directly below her, in the narrowest, most vulnerable part of the pass. A new group of riders emerged from a side canyon. Rusk's men. She saw Hawk Lyle, his arm in a sling, his face dark with rage. They were heavily armed. And one man was with them, shouting orders. "Get the powder set, Coulter. Get your men back Clanton. You light the fuse." "Clanton." Nora's blood went cold. She leaned over the edge, her heart stopping. The man named Clanton turned. He was wearing a heavy duster and a low-brimmed hat. He looked up at the cliffs, scanning for witnesses. The sun hit his face. She would not ride to Coyote Pass. Not yet. She had to answer this summons. She slipped into the alley. The moon was low, casting long, black shadows. She followed the trail. The chalk mark was repeated at the end of the alley. She crossed the dry wash and saw another sign, a small stack of 3 stones, pointing toward the foothills. She walked for nearly an hour, moving through the gray, pre-dawn light. The trail led her into a narrow arroyo, a deep cut in the earth hidden by mesquite and palo verde trees. She smelled the faint scent of wood smoke. She rounded a high bank of red rock and stopped. It was a camp, but it was not the war party of Coulter's speeches. It was a dozen small, hidden shelters. It was old women, their faces maps of deep lines, tending a low, smokeless fire. It was children, sleeping in piles of blankets, their faces thin. It was 3 old men, mending harnesses. There were no warriors. There were no rifles. This was a camp of the old, the very young, and the women. This was not a band of raiders. This was a family, starving. This is the enemy Rusk warns you about. Taza emerged from the shadows. He had been watching her approach. He moved with a grace that was jarring. He was there, and then he was not. He gestured to the small camp. We were moved from the reservation. They said the land was bad. They moved us here. They said the water was good. Now, this water is also bad, and they say we cannot hunt. The well, Nora whispered, her hand rising to her bruised cheek. The oil, in the town well. And in the spring, 2 miles up. Taza said, they poison the water. They shoot the deer and leave them to rot. They want us gone, or dead. He stepped closer. He was tall, and he smelled of the desert, of dust and clean air. A white hand is making the silver dirty. It is making the water dirty. We only want to live. We do not want to die. Nora looked at the sleeping children. She thought of the black crates, the dynamite, the silver dust, the plan to blame these people, these starving families, for a violent robbery. They are planning something, Nora said, her voice hard. At Coyote Pass, they have a wagon shipment of silver. They are going to blow it up and say you did it. Taza's face remained impassive, but his eyes, they burned. We know. We have watched. We know they move the black powder. We know they lie. How? Nora asked. You are not the only one who watches. Taza said, my people see the wagons. We see the guards. And we see the lies. He looked down at the ring on her hand. You spoke for my people when the sun was high. You fought the man who struck you. You wear the stone. You are an ally, whether you chose it or not. He killed my husband, Nora whispered, the words finally coming out. The man Rusk, the collapse at the mine, it was not an accident. They used that oil, that tar. My husband knew. Taza nodded slowly. The man Jacob, we know. We saw the fire at the mine, before the collapse. We saw the men who set it, the men with hawk's eyes. He meant Lyle. The alliance was sealed. It was not just about the ring. It was about the water, the silver, and the dead. They will move the wagon at dawn. Taza said, they will make their theater. We will be there, to watch. But now, you will be there too. Yes, Nora said, her hand closing over the cold turquoise. I will. S' face was bearded. It was thinner than she remembered, harder. But it was him. It was Jacob. Her dead husband, the man whose initial was on the handkerchief flapping in the wind. He was alive. He was standing with them. He was Clanton. Nora's world compressed to a single, silent point. The man in the duster. The man called Clanton. The man shouting orders to light the fuse. It was Jacob. The sound of the canyon, the hot wind, the scrape of boots on rock. It all vanished. She was deaf, blind to everything but the face of the man she had buried. The man she had mourned for 6 months. He was thinner, his face harder, the bone sharpened by sun and a new, cold purpose. But it was him. The beard did not hide the shape of his mouth. The low hat did not hide his eyes. Clanton, light the fuse! Hawk Lyle yelled again. his voice raw. "Jacob! Her Jacob!" He turned, not looking up, and ran toward the second wagon. He was part of it. He was the foreman from the letter. He was Clanton. The man who was supposed to be dead was here, actively participating in the crime that had set her on this path. Then the world returned in a roar. A blinding flash erupted from the side of the canyon trail. Near the first wagon, the explosion was deafening. It was not the wagon itself, but a charge planted in the rock face just beside it. The blast sent a shower of red rock and debris raining down. The heavy freight wagon, the decoy, was blasted onto its side, its wheels spinning uselessly. "Apache!" Sheriff Coulter screamed, his voice part of the script. He fired his pistol into the air. "It is an ambush. They are in the rocks." Lyle followed suit, firing his rifle toward the cliffs. "They are here, the whole tribe." From her ledge, Nora saw the performance. Rusk's men, who had been calm moments before, now scattered, taking cover, firing wildly at empty rocks. It was the theater Coulter had planned. Lyle, his arm in its sling, used his good hand to raise his rifle. He was not firing at random. He was aiming. He had seen movement on the opposite rim. He was aiming at Taza. Nora's shock fractured, replaced by a cold, white rage. She had come prepared. She had not known for what, but she had come prepared. Tucked in her waistband was the small, heavy pistol from Jacob's trunk, the one she had never fired, the one she had kept, just as she had kept the handkerchief. She pulled it out. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold it. She raised it, pointing it not at Lyle, but at the rock face just above his head. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The sound was small compared to the explosion, a sharp crack. The bullet screamed off the canyon wall, whining, spitting stone fragments into Lyle's face. He yelled, ducking, firing his rifle uselessly into the sky. Who is that? They are on both sides." The diversion was all Taza needed. He did not climb down. He fell. He dropped from the high rim, landing in a spray of gravel, silent as a mountain cat. Before Lyle could even turn, Taza was moving. Two of Rusk's gunmen, startled by the shot from Nora's ledge, spun toward him. They were too slow. Taza was not there to kill. He was there to stop. He struck the first man in the throat with the edge of his hand. The man crumpled, gagging. The second man raised his pistol. Taza moved under the arm, seized the wrist, and twisted. There was a sharp, wet snap of bone. The man shrieked and fell. It took less than 3 seconds. 2 men were down, not dead, but broken. The canyon floor was a mess of smoke, dust, and shouting men. "Signal," Coulter roared at one of his deputies. Call them now!" The man raised a long brass horn to his lips and blew a high, piercing note, the signal. In the distance, from the direction of Mesquite Crossing, a new cloud of dust appeared. The reinforcements, the townsfolk, whipped into a frenzy by Rusk's agents, were coming. They were riding into the trap, to be the audience for the final act. Nora saw Ellis Finch, the reporter, near the front of the arriving crowd. His horse lathered. He was already writing in his notebook, his face pale with excitement. "Apache ambush," he was shouting to the man next to him. "Taza's raiders have hit the silver. The wagon is lost." The lie was being written into history right before her eyes. Jacob, her husband, the man called Clanton, had been thrown to the ground by the blast. He stood up, pulling the dusty scarf from his face, and saw Taza standing over the 2 downed men. He drew his pistol. "No!" Nora's voice was a raw scream. She was scrambling down the steep goat path, sliding, falling, cutting her hands on the rock. "Jacob." He froze. His head snapped toward the sound of her voice. He saw her, a small, dust-covered figure, stumbling toward him, her hair wild. His face, the face of a dead man, went completely white. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Nora," he whispered. The pistol wavered in his hand. She reached the canyon floor. She stood 10 feet from him, breathing in ragged, sobbing gasps. The world seemed to stop again. "You are alive," she said, the words tearing out of her. "You are Clanton." His eyes darted around. Coulter was yelling. Taza was watching them both, his face a mask of stone. The townsfolk were arriving, adding to the confusion. "Nora, you cannot be here," Jacob hissed. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard, pulling her behind the overturned wagon. "You have to get out of here, now." "You let me mourn you," she said, her voice breaking. She struck his chest with her free hand. "I cried for you. I buried an empty box, and you are one of them." "I did it for us," he said, his voice a low, frantic rasp. "Do not you understand? The mine was a setup. Rusk knew it was going to collapse. He offered me a deal, a way out. He paid me. He faked the records, the insurance money. Nora, it was for you. So you would be safe, and a new job for me. A new name, a new life, a future." "A future!" she cried, yanking her arm free. She looked at his hands, the hands that had held her. They were stained with the black, acrid tar from the crates, stained with the glittering silver dust he was supposed to scatter as evidence. "This is your future, building a life on murder on their graves, on framing these people." "They do not matter." Jacob's voice was raw. The man she had loved was gone. This was a stranger. "We matter. I did this for us." "You did this for you," she whispered, the betrayal a cold, physical sickness in her stomach. "You chose the money." His face hardened. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, desperate calculation. He looked at her, at the woman who was not supposed to be there. "You were not supposed to come here," he said, his voice flat. "You were supposed to be the grieving widow in Tucson. You have the insurance papers. You have the death certificate. As far as the world knows. Nora Avery, you are a ghost. You do not exist here." He took a step toward her. His meaning was terrifyingly clear. A ghost cannot be a witness. A ghost cannot talk. "She is not a ghost." Taza's voice cut through the chaos. He stepped between them. He was wounded. A gash on his arm, from one of the guards, was bleeding, but he was solid, an immovable object. He stood in front of Nora, shielding her. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, were locked on Jacob. Jacob raised his pistol. "Get out of my way, Apache!" Bang! A single rifle shot echoed down the pass. It was not from Jacob. It was from further away, from a high ridge where the pass opened up. Taza grunted, a sharp exhalation of breath. He staggered, but he did not fall. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain blossomed on his right shoulder. Nora screamed. On the ridge, astride a large black horse, sat Caleb Rusk. He held a long, smoking rifle. He had been watching the entire performance. He smiled, a cold, satisfied smile, and lowered the gun. "There he is!" Coulter roared, his voice triumphant. He pointed his finger at the wounded Taza. "There is the ringleader, Taza! We have him! He is shot! Get him! Get the Apache!" The townsfolk, seeing the smoking wagon, the wounded Apache, and the heroic sheriff, surged forward with a roar. Rusk's men led the charge, their pistols drawn. It was a lynch mob. It was chaos, dust, smoke, men yelling. Taza was one-armed, bleeding, but he stood his ground, pushing Nora behind him. Jacob was frozen, his pistol still raised, trapped between his old life and his new one. Nora saw it, through the smoke, the second fuse, the one Jacob had been ordered to light. It was still there, running from a small hole in the side of the real strongbox, the one holding the actual silver. Hawk Lyle, recovering from Nora's warning shot, saw it too. He understood the new plan. If they were interrupted, they were to destroy everything. Leave no evidence. He pulled a match from his pocket, struck it on his boot, and lunged for the fuse. "No!" Nora screamed. She was not a widow. She was not a ghost. She was done being a victim. She burst past Taza, shoving Jacob aside so hard he fell. She ran, her legs pumping. Lyle looked up, his face a mask of hate, the small flame just inches from the fuse. She did not have the pistol. She had something better. She ripped the obsidian knife from the sheath in her sleeve. The black blade, Taza's grandfather's blade, felt like a part of her. She did not slow. She did not hesitate. She slashed down with all her strength. The razor-sharp volcanic glass cut through the thick, tallow-coated fuse cord as if it were thread. The lit match in Lyle's hand touched only dirt. The strongbox was safe. The second, more terrible explosion had been stopped. Nora stood over the severed fuse, breathing like a winded animal. The black knife gripped tight in her hand. The canyon floor was a bedlam of smoke and screaming. For a half-second, everyone was frozen. Nora stood with the obsidian knife in her hand, the severed fuse at her feet. Hawk Lyle stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Jacob was still on the ground, his face white with shock. "Get her!" Lyle's voice was a raw shriek. "Kill her! Kill them both!" The lynch mob, seeing their plans shattered, surged forward. Taza grabbed Nora. His good hand seized her arm. "We go, now!" He shoved her toward the steep goat path where she had hidden her horse. The same path she had just scrambled down. He was a solid wall at her back, shielding her. A pistol cracked, the bullet whining past her ear. "Jacob!" Nora screamed, looking back. Her husband, the man called Clanton, was still on his knees. He looked up, his face torn, paralyzed, watching his old life and his new life collide. He did not move. He made his choice. Taza grunted, shoving her again. "Climb!" The mob was at the base of the path. Taza, bleeding heavily from the rifle wound Rusk had given him, turned. He picked up a rock the size of his fist and hurled it. It struck one of Rusk's gunmen in the chest, sending him sprawling. Taza used his good arm, his left, to block a clubbed rifle. He was weak, but his body moved with a warrior's economy. "Go, Nora!" he yelled. She reached the ledge. Dusty was terrified, pulling at his reins. She untied him, scrambling into the saddle. Taza was right behind her. He tried to swing up, but his wounded shoulder gave way. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Lyle was halfway up the path, his face purple with rage. Nora leaned down, grabbing the front of Taza's shirt. "You are not dying here," she snarled, her voice a raw thing. She hauled, she pulled with all the strength of her fear and her rage. He got his foot into the stirrup and half climbed, half fell onto the horse's rump, slumping against her back. His good arm locked around her waist, a band of iron. "Ride," he whispered, his voice thick with pain. "Into the wash. Do not follow the main trail." She kicked the horse, Dusty, carrying double, plunged down the rocky, treacherous far side of the ridge. Bullets snapped at the air around them. They were a clear target, a lone woman and a wounded Apache fleeing the law. They rode hard for 20 minutes. The sky, which had been a clear, burning blue, was turning a deep, bruised purple. A strange cold wind whipped her hair across her face. Thunder, deep and low, rumbled in the distance. A freak desert storm was rolling in. "They are coming!" Taza breathed against her neck. Nora looked back. She could see them. Lyle, leading a posse of 6 men. They were gaining. Their horses were fresh. Dusty was laboring. "The arroyo forks," Taza ordered, his voice tight. "Left, quickly!" She hauled the horse to the left, into a narrower, deeper canyon. The walls rose high on either side. It was a trap. "Here," Taza said, sliding off the horse. He landed hard, nearly collapsing. "What are you doing?" she cried, pulling Dusty to a halt. "It is a dead end." "No," he said, breathing hard. He pointed. Tucked into a side canyon, hidden by a stand of creosote bush, was a small, broken-down freight wagon. Beside it, a large wooden barrel lay on its side, a thick black liquid leaking from it into the sand. Nora smelled it, the sharp, acrid stink of tar. The marine paint. "They left it," she whispered. "The wagon they used to haul the dynamite?" She looked at the trail. Lyle was following their tracks in the sand. "He will ride right past this." A desperate, cold idea took her. She dismounted. "The oil," she said. She grabbed a flat piece of broken crate wood. She ran to the leaking barrel and scooped up a thick, heavy glob of the black tar. She ran back to the trail, smearing a wide, unbroken line across the sand, from one canyon wall to the other. "We need a fire," she said. Taza was already fumbling in his pouch with his good hand. He pulled out his flint and steel. "The rain," he grunted. Fat, cold drops of water were beginning to fall. The tinder was damp. "They are here," a voice echoed from the canyon. "Lyle." "I see them." Taza struck the flint. A spark. It died. He struck again, shielding the small piece of dry moss he kept. A tiny ember glowed. He blew on it gently, his face rigid with pain and concentration. A small, weak flame licked at the moss. He touched it to a dry yucca stalk. He staggered to the line of tar and dropped the burning stalk. It did not just catch, it ignited. There was a sound, a sharp whoosh, and a wall of blue and green flame leaped 10 feet into the air. Greasy, black smoke boiled toward the sky. It was the color of the obsidian knife. It was the fire of the Thunderbird. They heard screams from the other side. The horses of the posse whinnied in terror. "Now," Taza said, hauling himself back onto the horse, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Ride, before the storm puts it out." They rode for another hour. The sky opened up. The desert rain was not a soft mist. It was a cold, driving sheet that turned the dry washes into muddy rivers and washed their tracks away. The fire was far behind them. Taza was slumping, his weight a dead thing against her. He was losing too much blood. "We have to stop," Nora said, her voice frantic. "Here," he whispered. He pointed to a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a place so small she would have ridden past it. It was hidden by a curtain of drooping yucca. "In here." She slid off Dusty, her legs weak. She half-dragged, half-carried Taza from the saddle. He leaned on her, his breathing shallow. She led him and the horse into the narrow fissure. The opening widened. It was a cave, dry and deep. It was not a mine. It was a natural hollow, a shelter. In the back, she could hear the drip of water. A small, clear pool, a cistern, had gathered in the rock. She eased Taza to the ground. He slumped against the cave wall. "Let me see," she said. Her voice was not the voice of a widow. It was the voice of a woman who had seen too much. She tore a strip from her petticoat and soaked it in the cold, clear water. She gently pulled the tattered, bloody shirt away from his shoulder. The bullet had gone through. It was a clean wound, but it was deep, and it would not stop bleeding. "It needs to be sewn," she said, her voice flat. "We have no needle." He breathed. His eyes closed. Nora looked around the cave. The floor was sand, but in one corner, a pack rat had built a nest, a messy pile of sticks and debris. She pawed through it. She found it, a thin, white shard of bone, sharp as any needle. "We have this," she said. She pulled a long, strong thread from the hem of her wool skirt. She knelt beside him. She washed the wound. He did not flinch, but his body was a rigid line of pain. "This will hurt," she whispered. "It already hurts," he replied, not opening his eyes. She threaded the sinew into a crack in the bone and began. Her hands, which had trembled holding the pistol, were now rock steady. She pushed the bone needle through his skin. He hissed, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. She put her free hand on his uninjured shoulder, a simple weight to steady him. "Hold still." His good hand came up. It covered hers. His skin was hot. He held her hand, pressing it against his shoulder as she worked. She finished the last stitch, pulling it tight. She was leaning close. The smell of him, of sweat and blood and the desert, filled her senses. Her forehead was almost touching his, her hair falling around them like a curtain. "It is done," she whispered. "You have a strong hand," he said, his voice thick. He did not move away. His eyes opened. They were inches apart. They stayed that way for a long time. The storm raged outside, a muffled, distant drum. In the cave, there was only the sound of their breathing, the drip of water. She pulled back, her heart hammering in a new, strange way. "When it is light," she said, her voice catching. "I am going back to the town. I am coming with you." "Easy, children. You will wake the dead." The voice came from the blackness at the back of the cave. Taza was on his feet in an instant, the obsidian knife in his good hand. Nora scrambled up, shielding him. A lantern flared, blinding them. Hattie Pike stood in a narrow opening, a tunnel that had been invisible in the dark. She was carrying a heavy basket. "Hattie!" Nora gasped. "Old silver tunnels." Hattie grunted, stepping down into the cave. "The whole valley is riddled with them. The prospectors knew how to hide. I used to play in these when I was a girl." She looked at Taza, at the crude stitches. "Good work, Nora, but that will poison." She pulled a bundle of dried herbs from her basket. "A sage poultice. It will burn like the devil, but it will keep the wound clean." She handed Nora a canteen and a loaf of bread. "Eat." "What happened?" Nora asked, tearing at the bread. "At the pass, Lyle." "Chaos," Hattie said, her face grim. "Rusk has his story. The townsfolk are terrified. They believe the Apache attacked. They all saw Taza. Coulter has a posse scouring the foothills. Lyle is leading them. He is mad. He wants you both." Nora's stomach went cold. "And Jacob?" Hattie's eyes hardened. "He is back in town. Clanton, the brave foreman, who survived the attack. Rusk is holding a town meeting. Tomorrow, at the church. He is calling it a trial. A trial to condemn the Apache, seize their lands, and demand protection. His protection." "And the water," Nora said, remembering the document. "Yes." Hattie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I found this in Coulter's office. The new water deed. It grants Rusk sole access to the river. It is already signed by Reverend Whitlow." Nora took the deed. She now had the invoice for the paint. She had the water deed. And in her pocket, she had Jacob's letter. "He is holding a trial," Nora said, her voice like ice. "Good. I will be a witness." "Nora, you cannot," Hattie pleaded. "It is a lynch mob in a church. They will kill you before you speak a word." "They will have to," Nora said. Taza had been watching, silent. He stood, his jaw set. She will not be alone. He reached to his hair. With his good hand, he unwound a single, thin braid of his black hair. It was bound with red sinew and a single, small hawk feather. He held it out to Nora. "This is a warrior's tie," he said, his voice low. "It is a promise of protection. It does not bind the soul, if the heart does not wish it." Nora took the braid. Her fingers closed around it. "You must go, Hattie," Taza said. "They will miss you." "Be careful," Hattie said, her eyes on the two of them. "The wind is rising. A sandstorm is coming. It will cover your tracks, but it will hide Lyle, too." She gave Nora one last, desperate look and vanished back into the tunnel. The wind outside the cave was no longer just the sound of rain. It was a high, screaming keen. A river of sand and dust was scouring the canyon. "Lyle will be searching the washes," Taza said, moving to the cave mouth. "The storm will hide us, but it will hide him, too." "How do we get back to town?" "We do not. Not yet. We must pull him away. We will leave a false trail. Take the horse, ride south. I will draw them off." "No," Nora said. "You are wounded. We ride together, or not at all. We will use the storm." They sat in the darkness, the world dissolving into sand and noise outside. The silence in the cave was thick, broken only by the howl of the wind. "I was afraid," Nora said, her voice so soft Taza barely heard her. He turned. "Back at the pass," she said, looking at her hands. "I was not afraid of Lyle, or the guns. I was afraid of Jacob." Taza waited. "All my life," she whispered. "I was defined by a man. First, I was Jacob's wife. Then, I was Jacob's widow. When I saw him standing there, alive, I was afraid I would become Jacob's property again, that I would lose the name I had just found." Taza was quiet for a long time. The wind moaned, a sound of ghosts. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the soldiers at the fort gave me a white name, John. They said Taza was not a good name, a savage name." He looked at her, and in the deep darkness of the cave, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. "My name is Taza," he said. "I told them I am Taza." He leaned forward, his good shoulders stiff. "Your name is Nora. It is yours. No one has the right to write it for you." The sandstorm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world scoured and clean. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The air in Mesquite Crossing was still heavy with a silence that felt different. It was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a held breath. At 9 o'clock, the church bell began to ring. It was not the gentle call to Sunday service. It was a slow, heavy, deliberate clang. Clang, clang, a summons, a judgment. The church was full. Every miner, merchant, and teamster in town was packed into the hot, narrow pews. They were not there for scripture. They were there for a verdict. At the front, Reverend Whitlow stood at his pulpit, his thin face flushed with a terrible piety. Baron Caleb Rusk sat in the front pew, his hands folded, looking like a man attending a solemn, necessary duty. Sheriff Coulter stood by the door, his hand on his pistol, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Hawk Lyle, his splinted hand resting in a sling, stood near the back, his pale eyes searching, and in the second pew, looking pale and heroic, sat the man the town now knew as Clanton, the brave foreman who had survived the savage Apache ambush. Jacob. "We are gathered today," Reverend Whitlow began, his reedy voice cutting the silence. "Not in celebration, but in judgment. We were attacked, our industry, our progress. Our very lives were threatened by the godless heathen who plagued this valley." He pointed a long, bony finger toward the empty desert. "The Apache are guilty. Guilty of theft, guilty of attempted murder, guilty before God." A low murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. They were angry. They were afraid. They were ready. "And now," Whitlow said, "we will hear the testimony of the man who saw it all, the man who bravely faced the savage. Taza, I call Mr. Clanton to speak." Jacob stood up. His face was pale. He looked at Rusk. He looked at Coulter. He opened his mouth. The heavy church doors banged open. Every head turned. The sunlight silhouetted two figures. One was small and worn. The other was wide and solid. Nora Avery and Hattie Pike walked down the center aisle. A gasp went through the church. This was the woman from the saloon, the one who had vanished, the one Lyle had been hunting. She was supposed to be dead. Nora looked at no one but the man standing at the front, her husband, Jacob. "What is the meaning of this?" Whitlow demanded, his voice cracking. "This is a closed hearing." "It is a town meeting, Reverend," Hattie Pike boomed, her voice filling the small church. "And we are the town." Nora's eyes were locked on Jacob. His face was a mask of terror. Mr. Clanton," Rusk said. his voice a smooth, cold interruption. "Please, tell the people what happened." Jacob swallowed. He looked at Nora, his eyes pleading. It was an ambush. The Apache, Taza—" "Stop," Nora said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so cold, so clear, that it stopped him cold. "That is the woman," Hawk Lyle shouted from the back, pointing his good hand. "She was with him. She is a traitor. Seize her." "One moment," a new voice said. Ellis Finch, the young reporter, stood up from his pew. He was holding something in his hand. It was a square of glass, a photographic plate. "Sheriff," Finch said, his voice shaking but clear, "you said the Apache burned the rail depot. And Reverend, you said they attacked the wagon. I was paid to write those stories." He held up the glass plate. "But this is a photograph. It does not lie." He walked to the front and held it up to the light of the window. "I took this 3 nights ago. I was testing my camera in the dark. It shows the alley behind Hattie's saloon. It shows Sheriff Coulter and Mr. Lyle. And it shows them unloading 8 black crates. The crates, Mr. Rusk, that your own invoice claimed were marine paint." The room was absolutely silent. Coulter's hand tightened on his pistol. "The boy is delirious," Rusk said, smiling. "He is seeing things." "Is he?" Nora said, taking another step forward. She was standing directly in front of Jacob now. "Mr. Clanton," Rusk said, his voice hardening, a steel edge beneath the silk. "Tell the truth. Tell them what you saw. Tell them about the insurance policy, the one meant to protect your future." "It was a threat, a clear, cold threat." Jacob looked at Rusk, then at Nora. He was sweating. Nora raised her right hand. In it, she held a faded linen handkerchief, the one with the letter J embroidered in the corner. "This," she said to Jacob, "was for the man I buried, the man I mourned." Then she raised her left hand. The turquoise ring, Taza's ring, gleamed on her finger. "And this," she said, her voice shaking with a terrible, hard-won strength, "is for the woman who lived. I will keep my name. I will not keep your guilt." Jacob looked as if she had struck him. He staggered back. "Nora, He is lying," Lyle roared. "She is a liar." "The invoice does not lie," Hattie said, stepping forward. She threw a piece of paper onto the pulpit, rattling Whitlow's Bible. "And neither does this, the new water deed, signed by the Baron and the good Reverend, stealing the last of the Apache water, stealing the river." The townsfolk surged forward, miners pressing in, trying to see the papers. The lie was cracking. "This meeting is over," Rusk said. Standing, he was no longer smiling. His hand went inside his black coat. The church doors, for the 3rd time, swung open. Taza stood there. He was alone. The poultice Hattie had made was a dark, bloody stain on his shoulder. His arm bound to his chest. He was wounded, hunted, but he walked down the aisle as if he owned the ground beneath it. "Murderer!" someone screamed. Rusk pulled his pistol. "He is here. The proof. Kill him." Rusk fired. At the same moment, Coulter drew his gun. A miner in the back, who had lost his own claim to Rusk, fired his pistol at the ceiling. It was chaos. Women screamed. Men ducked. Gunpowder smoke filled the house of God. A stray bullet, from where no one knew, flew high. It struck the massive brass bell in the belfry above them. There was a sound unlike any other, a deafening, cracked, discordant clang, gang, a sound of broken iron, the sound of the lie shattering. In the confusion, Hawk Lyle saw his chance. He lunged across the pews, grabbing Nora from behind. He wrapped his one good arm around her neck, dragging her back. He pressed a long skinning knife to her throat. "Everybody back," he shrieked, his voice hysterical. "Back, or she dies. Taza, you drop your weapon. Oh, wait, You do not have one." Nora was frozen, the cold steel biting into her skin. Taza had not moved. He was watching Lyle, his eyes flat and cold. His good hand, his left, went to his belt. Lyle laughed. "What are you going to do? Throw your—" Taza's arm moved, a blur of motion. Something black and shining flew through the smoky air. It was not a tomahawk. It was not a steel blade. It was the obsidian knife. It crossed the 10 feet of space in the blink of an eye. There was a sound, a solid, wet thwack. Lyle's eyes went wide. He screamed. The knife he had held to Nora's throat clattered to the floor. His hand, his one good hand, was pinned. The black volcanic glass had gone straight through his palm, pinning him, like an insect, to the thick oak pillar that held up the church roof. Nora did not wait. She was free. She slammed her elbow back into Lyle's stomach, hard. He gasped, folding, and she scrambled away from him. "You witch!" Sheriff Coulter had his pistol raised. He was aiming it directly at Nora. Rusk was down, having been tackled by a miner. Coulter was alone. He was aiming at the woman who had ruined everything. Nora. Jacob moved. He was not Clanton. He was not a ghost. He was just Jacob. He dove, his body covering hers, just as Coulter fired. The sound of the shot was deafening. Jacob's body went rigid. A red stain, bright and terrible, bloomed on the back of his white shirt. He collapsed onto her, his head falling against her shoulder. "Jacob!" she screamed, catching him. He looked at her. His eyes were clear, the fear and the greed gone. There was only a deep, terrible regret. "He was right," Jacob whispered, his voice already weak. "The collapse. Nora, it was Rusk's powder to close the shaft. I did it for the money. I am sorry, His eyes closed. He went limp in her arms. He was not dead, but he was gone. Nora lowered him gently to the floor. The church was silent. The smell of blood and sulfur hung in the air. Lyle was whimpering, pinned to the post. Coulter stood, his pistol smoking, his eyes wide. Rusk was on the floor, a large miner's knee in his back. The townsfolk stood, frozen. They had seen it. They had seen the photo. They had seen the deed. They had seen the violence from Rusk's men, and they had heard the confession. The story of the Apache raid on Coyote Pass crumbled to dust. Sheriff Coulter dropped his pistol. It clattered on the wooden floor. It was over. Nora stood up. She was covered in Jacob's blood. She was shaking. Taza walked to her. He did not look at Jacob. He did not look at Rusk. He looked only at her. He walked past her to the pillar where Lyle was pinned. With one hard yank, he pulled the obsidian knife free and wiped the blade clean on Lyle's own shirt. He walked back to Nora. He stood before her, in front of the entire town, in front of the altar. His eyes were on her left hand. The turquoise ring was gone. It had fallen from her finger in the struggle, or perhaps she had taken it off to face Jacob. It lay on the floor, near the severed fuse. Taza bent. He picked it up. He did not hand it to her. He took her left hand. It was trembling, stained with her husband's blood. He slid the ring, the stone of his people, back onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He held her gaze, his voice low and clear, for all to hear. "This was worn for protection," he said, his voice echoing in the ruined silence. "It is worn now for respect, and it is worn by free choice." The silence that followed Taza's words was absolute. It was not the silence of fear, but of recalibration. The town of Mesquite Crossing, packed into the small, smoky church, had just witnessed its entire reality collapse and be rebuilt in the space of 10 minutes. Caleb Rusk, his face a mask of cold, patrician fury, was hauled to his feet by the same miner who had tackled him. The man's hands were rough, and he did not handle the Baron gently. "You stole my claim, Rusk." The miner growled, his voice low. "You stole it with paper. Now I am holding you with rope." Reverend Whitlow had sunk onto the front pew, his head in his hands. "I was deceived," he whispered, rocking back and forth. "A man of God? I was deceived." "You were paid." Hattie Pike's voice boomed from the aisle. She kicked the water deed that lay on the floor. "You traded your flock for a new steeple." She spat on the floor, an unladylike gesture that earned her a low murmur of approval. The Reverend's career in Mesquite Crossing was over. Ellis Finch, the young reporter, was not writing. He looked ill. He stepped forward and picked up his glass photo plate, the invoice and the water deed. He looked at Nora, then at Taza, his face a mixture of shame and a new, hard resolve. I will write this," he stammered. "I will write the truth." And he did. The article he sent by telegraph, and then in print on the next stagecoach, was not the flowery prose of the railroad. It was stark, brutal, and honest. The Truth at Coyote Pass. The headline ran, "Barron's Conspiracy Unmasked by Widow and Apache Leader. Apache Saved the Wagon." It was the first time the word saviors had been used to describe Taza's people in any newspaper. The territorial marshal arrived 2 days later, summoned by Hattie. The town's lockup was not large enough to hold the conspirators. Caleb Rusk, Sheriff Coulter, and Hawk Lyle were taken by wagon to Tucson, heavily chained, to await a federal trial. The town watched them go in silence. The power that had choked Mesquite Crossing was broken, its agents hauled away in disgrace. Jacob did not go with them. He had survived. The bullet had torn through muscle and lung, but had missed his heart. The town doctor, a quiet man who had seen too much, had patched him up. His confession, given in a weak, pained whisper to the marshal, had sealed Rusk's fate. Nora went to see him one last time, in the small, dark room behind the doctor's office where he was kept under guard. He lay on a cot, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Nora," he breathed, his eyes fluttering open. She stood at the foot of the cot. She was not wearing her apron. She was wearing her own clothes, and the turquoise ring was bright on her hand. She looked at him, the man she had loved. The anger was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was a deep, quiet emptiness. "You lied," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact, like stating the color of the sky. "You let me mourn you. You let me die with you." "I wanted a future," he rasped, his hand weakly reaching for hers. "For us." She did not take his hand. "You wanted money. You built your future on the bodies of other men, and you tried to build it on the ghosts of your own people." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I am not your ghost, Jacob." He closed his eyes, a single, painful tear leaking from the corner. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I know," she said. She turned and walked out. His confession earned him leniency. He was not tried with Rusk. He was given a lighter sentence for his cooperation, and for the bullet he had taken. 5 years hard labor in the territorial prison mine at Yuma. Nora heard the news without emotion. She did not oust him. She did not forgive him. She simply closed the trunk on that part of her life. The town began to breathe again. The first order of business for the new town council, with Hattie Pike elected as its chairwoman, was to take down the sign. The wood that read, "No Indians after dark," was pulled from the land office wall and used for kindling. The next week, a new agreement was struck. Taza, his shoulder healing cleanly under the sage poultice, sat at the main table in Hattie's saloon. He did not ask for land. He did not ask for money. He asked for the water. The new water treaty, written on a simple piece of paper in Ellis Finch's clear hand, guaranteed the NDE people sole access to their sacred springs and shared access to the main river. The town, humbled and wiser, signed it without argument. Life began to find a new rhythm. Hattie, seeing the hunger in the eyes of the Apache children who now came to town freely, started a new tradition. Every new moon, She opened the saloon kitchen, a public supper, free stew, bread, and coffee for anyone who needed it. Nora served the stew, her hands steady. The saloon was loud, but it was a new sound. It was the sound of children laughing, both Apache and white, chasing each other around the tables. The fear was gone, replaced by a cautious, growing community. Nora found herself smiling, a real, light smile that reached her eyes. That night, she went up to her attic room. It was her room, not a temporary cot, but her home. She opened her small wooden trunk, the scent of cedar rising to meet her. She pulled out the faded linen handkerchief, the embroidered J. For so long, it had been her shield, her identity, her grief. She looked at it, the symbol of a life that had been a lie. With slow, deliberate hands, she folded it. She placed it in the bottom of the trunk. It was not a shackle. It was just a memory. She closed the lid. The heat of late summer settled on the valley, but the nights were cooler. Taza came to her, not at the saloon, but as she was walking by the newly cleaned town well. He was not armed, save for the obsidian knife at his belt. His shoulder was stiff, but the wound was a puckered, healing scar. "Come," he said. She did not ask where. She simply turned and followed him. He led her out of the town, away from the dusty streets, up into the high foothills where the air was thinner and smelled of juniper and dry pine. He led her to a place hidden from the trail, a small, sacred grove of twisted scrub oaks. In the center, a circle of dark, wet earth. A freshwater spring bubbled quietly. "This is the heart," Taza said, his voice low. "The water Rusk tried to steal. It is where our people first drank from this land." Nora knelt. The water was so clear it was almost invisible. She cupped her hands and drank. The water was colder than the deepest well, sweet and tasting of the rock and the earth. She dipped her hand back in, letting the cool water flow over her fingers, over the turquoise ring. "Freedom," she whispered, to the water, to the quiet grove. "It smells cool." He watched her, his face unreadable in the dappled light. That night, they sat by a fire. It was not a hidden fire in a dark arroyo. It was a small, clean fire in the open air, on a flat mesa overlooking the valley. They were not hiding. They sat for a long time, the silence comfortable, punctuated by the snap of the fire. The storm was long gone. The sky was a deep, impossible velvet, strewn with so many stars it looked like spilled salt. The clouds that had been the thunderbird were now just a thin, peaceful wisp in the west. The air was still. "My name," Nora said, looking into the flames. "You said I had to keep it. I feel as if I have only just found it." It's a day that plays over. You did not find it," Taza said, his voice a low rumble. "You made it." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "In my culture, we do not have the paper promises of your world. We do not have the hard gold. A promise is a promise." He reached into the pouch at his belt and pulled out the thin, dark braid of his own hair, the one tied with red sinew and the hawk feather, the one he had given her in the cave. This was given as a warrior's pledge, a promise of protection. Nora met his gaze. She reached into her own pocket and pulled it out. She had carried it ever since. "I offer it again?" he said. He did not move closer. He just looked at her, across the small fire, not as a warrior, but as a man. It is not a tie that binds. It is not ownership. It means we walk the same path by choice. He was not offering to save her. He was not offering to define her. He was offering to walk beside her. Nora looked at the braid in her hand. She thought of Jacob's lies, of the feeling of being property, of being a ghost in her own life. Then she looked at Taza, his face honest in the firelight. She held the braid up. "This," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is a promise I can keep." Below them, the lights of Mesquite Crossing were few, but they were steady. The next morning, Nora saw the miner who had bound Rusk sharing a twist of tobacco with one of Taza's elders by the mercantile. They were not talking about the law or the silver. They were talking about the lack of rain. They were just men. The town was, slowly, beginning to call its people by their right names. The dust settled. The blood was washed from the church floor. The town of Mesquite Crossing did not go back to what it was. It could not. It had to become something new. Autumn came, painting the high desert in pale golds and rust. The oppressive, suffocating heat of the summer and the heat of Rusk's lies finally broke. Nora did not leave. She had come to town with nothing but a horse, a trunk, and a lie about finding work. She had found something else. She had found her name. She did not return to scrubbing floors. Hattie Pike, with a gruff, generous loan, helped her lease the small, abandoned adobe hut by the town well, the one with the poison. Nora and 3 of Taza's people, 2 women and an old man, spent a week cleansing it. They dug out the bad earth. They lined the well with fresh, clean stone. They replastered the walls until the little hut was bright and clean. Nora painted a sign. She was not a great artist, but she painted it herself. A simple wooden board, painted with the same bright, clear blue as the stone on her finger. It did not say saloon. It did not say boarding house. It just said Nora's. She opened a small eatery. It was not a grand place. It had 3 tables inside and 2 outside. Under a new canvas awning, she served what she knew. Hattie taught her how to make a thick, hearty mesquite bean soup. Taza's people taught her how to make light, perfect Apache cornbread, baked on a hot, flat stone. She served strong, black coffee and fresh, clean water from the well. It became the center of the town. Miners and merchants sat at the same tables as Apache families. They broke the same bread. They drank from the same water. It was a simple thing, but it was the start of a new language. One afternoon, Ellis Finch sat at one of her tables. He looked older. The slick, eager look of the railroad correspondent was gone. He looked like a man who had been forced to see the world as it was. He laid a copy of the Tucson newspaper on the table. "It is done," he said quietly. Nora wiped her hands on her apron and read the headline. Rusk sentenced. 20 years. Federal prison. Coulter. Lyle to follow. "It is not just here," Ellis said, tapping the paper. "Your story. Taza's story. It is being printed all the way to Santa Fe. People are asking questions now. About the railroad. About the land grants. About the other Indian raids." "It is a start," Nora said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "It is more than a start," Ellis said, looking at her. "It is a reckoning." He folded the paper. "I am leaving. I cannot write for them anymore. I am going to start my own paper. A small one, but it will be an honest one." "Good luck, Mr. Finch," she said. "Good luck, Mrs. Avery," he replied. Then he stopped, looking at the ring on her hand. "My apologies. I mean, Miss Nora." "Nora is fine," she said, and smiled. At the saloon, Hattie Pike was, as she put it, whipping the new help into shape. 2 young women, sisters who had fled the drought in Mexico, were learning to manage the books. They were 16 and 17, and they looked at Hattie with a mixture of terror and awe. "You stand up straight," Hattie barked at the older one, who was slumping over the ledger. "You are not a field hand. You are a businesswoman. You are here to count the money. You look every man in the eye. You let no one cheat you, not by a single cent. You are worth more than that. Now, add that column again, and do it right." The girl stood up straighter. The small town cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the valley. It was a lonely place, filled with simple wooden crosses and piles of stone. Nora went there one cool evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the mountains. She was not there to visit a grave. She was there to visit a name. She sat on the low stone wall, among the real dead. The miners who had not been offered a deal. The women who had died in childbirth, the children taken by fever. She looked at her hands. The thin, silvery scar from her old life was still on her wrist. The strong, blue turquoise of her new life was on her finger. She took a piece of paper and a pencil from her pocket. She had written the letter a dozen times in her mind. "To Jacob," she wrote, "I am sending this to the prison at Yuma. I do not know if you will read it. I am writing to tell you that I forgive you. Not for him, not for God. I forgive you for me. I forgive you because my anger is too heavy, and I will not carry it for you. I will not be your ghost, and I will not be your jailer. The bullet you took was not for me. It was for you. It was the only honest thing you did in that canyon. It was the moment you stopped being Clanton and remembered how to be Jacob. You have 5 years. Your old name is dead. Your new name is a lie. When you get out, you will have to build a new one. See that you build it with better things this time. See that you make it one you can keep. I am not your wife. I am not your widow. I am Nora. Goodbye." She folded the letter. She would give it to the stagecoach driver tomorrow. She felt the last chain break and fall away. She was free. That night, Taza came to her. He did not come to the eatery. He came to the small room behind it, where she lived. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the starry sky. He was not wearing the torn shirt from the fight. He wore a clean, traditional buckskin vest adorned with simple quill work. "The council has met," he said. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He entered her small home. He looked around. It was clean. It smelled of coffee and sage. "You have made a good place." "We made it," she corrected. He nodded. He reached to his hair. It was not the single braid he had given her in the cave. The warrior's pledge. This was a new one, a thicker one, woven with 2 strands of black hair and strands of bright, clean horsehair. It was bound in turquoise beads. "That," he said, touching the old braid, which she had tied to the frame of her cot, "was a promise to protect. This is a promise to build." He held the new braid out to her. "Our people," he said, his voice slow, measured. "We do not own each other. A man does not own his wife. A wife does not own her husband. They are 2 trees that grow beside each other. Their roots tangle. They share the same water. They give each other shade, but they are 2 trees. He laid the braid in her open palm. "This is a promise of a shared home, of one fire, of a shared life. No owners, only partners." Nora looked at the braid. She thought of the letter she had just written, the life she had closed. She looked up at his strong, honest face. "2 trees," she whispered. "I like that." She curled her fingers around the braid. "Yes, I will share the water." They did not sit idle. The piece was new, and it was fragile. They knew it had to be built on something more than just the absence of Rusk. It had to be built on trust, on a shared future. "The stage line," Taza said, as they sat by the well a week later. "The travelers, they pass through here. They are thirsty. Their horses are weak." "The railroad will not come through here now," Nora said, adding up the day's receipts. "Rusk's line is dead. The stage will be the lifeblood of this valley for a long time." "We should build a way station," Taza said. "Up by the sacred spring. The water is clean. The grazing is good." Nora looked at him, catching the spark. "Not just a station, a trading post, a place for travelers to rest. Your people can bring hides and beadwork. The miners can bring their silver. We can run it." "Together," he said. "A joint venture," Hattie Pike said, walking up, wiping her hands on her apron. "A shared economy. That is the only kind that lasts. I will put in the first 20%, but I expect a full accounting. Taza, no mystic nonsense." Taza almost smiled. "You will have it, Hattie Pike." The work began. It was hard work, stone on stone, plank on plank, but it was shared work. One last night, before the first snows touched the high peaks, Nora stood outside her small home. The desert was vast, bathed in a cold, blue moonlight. The wind was rising, and for the first time in a year, it smelled of rain, real rain, a promise of life. She looked out at the valley, at the small, steady lights of the town, and the distant winking fires of Taza's camp. They were no longer two separate places. They were just the valley. She was not the same woman who had ridden in on a dying horse. That woman was a ghost. She was not Jacob's widow. She was not Taza's possession. She was Nora, and she was home. She touched the turquoise ring on her finger. She whispered to the rising wind. Freedom is not a promise. It is a job, every day. The sun rose early the next morning, sharp and clean. The air was washed, smelling of wet sage and new beginnings. Two horses stood ready, side by side. Taza swung up onto his Nora, in her practical skirt and boots, mounted Dusty. He looked at her. She looked at him. He turned his horse, not toward the town, but toward the new trail, the one that led up to the high mesa, to the spring, to the place where they were building their future. Nora kicked her horse, moving alongside him. The rising sun caught the turquoise ring on her hand, and it flashed, a small, bright piece of the sky. They rode together, two trees side by side, into the morning. Ahead of them was the water, the justice, and the family they would build. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so glad to have you here. Let us know where in the world you are listening from in the comments below. We would love to share this experience with you. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to our channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help share this story with even more listeners.